Greetings, my name is Mike Bittner. I'm the technical lead for the Northwest Sub-Area Study. Today I'm going to talk about the project overview and conclusions that came from that study. As you can see on this first slide, the black dashed line highlights the sub-area that we're talking about. This is on the northwest area of the metropolitan area. You can see in green the city of West Fargo and in orange the city of Fargo. Predominantly this area is completely undeveloped. We have less than 3,000 people living there and fewer than 4,000 jobs, primarily in those existing city limit areas. So why are we studying this sub-area in particular? Well, this is a brief graphic of the 100-year floodplain. So you can see, looking back, the majority of this area is in the 100-year floodplain. However, at the completion of the Fargo-Moorhead diversion project, the majority of this area will be completely developable. It'll be out of the 100-year floodplain and become very desirable for new development. And so we want to focus in on what does this mean for the future growth in our metropolitan area. So we took a three-phase technical process. First, we wanted to develop and refine land use assumptions to know what would go in this sub-area. And we looked at this not only in the short term, but all the way through full build-out. And so this is likely beyond 50 years to get this entire sub-area built out. In terms of just land mass, it's an increase in more than 20% of the entire metro area. Then we wanted to understand what transportation improvements we'd need to accommodate this land use. And then finally, we brainstormed and analyzed transportation scenarios necessary to make sure that we felt comfortable about the improvements that we would start to plan in the future. This was all guided by a very rigorous stakeholder guidance process. We had 6 study review committee meetings, which included staff from the City of West Fargo, City of Fargo, and Cass County. On most meetings, we had more than 10 attendees from those 3 agencies, as well as Metro COG, of course. We also had 7 special stakeholder meetings, which included special meetings with property owners, neighborhoods. We had obviously Riley's Acres, NDSU, the airports authorities, and the townships. We had 2 public input meetings, 7 formal presentation to government bodies for final approval and question and answer and revisions. And then finally, 4 utility companies were contacted that have some sort of infrastructure within the sub-area to make sure that the plans we were proposing made sense. So starting with our first phase, the land use plan, here is a graphical representation of the proposed land use plan. And so you can see on the bottom right, the various different colors we're talking about. So blue is industrial, red is commercial, and then kind of the different shades of yellow, orange, and brown are just the intensities of mixed development. So you can see it's a much more focused on mixed development, which merges a residential and commercial in a variety of different land uses into one area. So I want to highlight a couple of key locations within our sub-area. First and foremost, on the northeast corner of our sub-area, we have a lot of short-term industrial growth we expect along County Road 20. This really puts into focus more short-term needs along this corridor. As we transition southwest just a bit, we have an existing rail line that really bisects the sub-area at an angle. And so typical design of roadways really likes to look at a grid network of north, south, east, west roadways. But for this case, we wanted to use a diagonal road that really complements that rail line. It allowed us to develop the most accommodating land use plan that really incorporates the rail line, but then allows us to transition naturally on the other side of the roadway. It also kept a lot of traffic off of 45th Street north of 19th Avenue into the Riley's Acres areas, which allowed us to make this a little bit more of a quieter roadway. As we transition to the southwest portion of our southwest sub-area, we start to see some really intense land uses. So that brown really highlights our most intense land use, but then even at our 38th Street interchange, which is existing, that's what's called the Raymond interchange with connectivity to Kindred to the south. We've got some very dense commercial access. And so as we get into the transportation plan, you're going to really see this intense density come to life through transportation challenges. We also wanted to translate this land use information into usable growth scenarios in terms of population and employment. And so what I've highlighted is one example. This is our single family residential, which is incorporated into those intensity units. And so what you'll see is we used real examples from both Fargo and West Fargo that we wanted to envision for the future of this sub-area. And the reason why I highlight this example is because these are some of the most densely populated single family residential areas. And so that's important to understand because the future of this sub-area is not going to be major 1 acre large size lots. And this has a lot to do with just the challenges that come from special assessments, but also land consumption rates with that type of design as well. And so on our low end, we're talking about some of the densest single family residential land uses. And then on our highest density, we're actually looking at more of a downtown style feel. And so really the kind of the moral of this slide, and we did the same thing for commercial and industrial and the other land uses, but the moral of this slide really comes back to that we are looking for a much higher density to build this sub-area so we can have much more complementary land uses. And that does come back out through the transportation process as well. So the next phase of the process is the transportation system assessment. So we take that land use information and we start to translate what that means to the number of cars, which our first model, the travel demand model, which is just a really robust computer model that looks for the next 20 years where traffic will be coming and going from based on land use assumptions. Then our second model is our traffic operations model, which starts to ask the question of how many lanes of capacity do we need and what kind of traffic control do we use. And finally, our roadway infrastructure model looks at what will this cost, what is the terrain, and what will the overall investment need to be for this area. So looking at our traffic, our regional traffic growth, you can see on this graphic we've got a color scale. So green means very low volumes, less than 2,500. Purple means very high volumes, greater than 30,000. So anything orange, red, or purple indicates really high traffic volumes. And so once we input these different land use assumptions and densities into the traffic model, we're able to understand where traffic is going to route through. And so what you'll notice is there is a tremendous amount of traffic growth, particularly on the southwest part of our sub-area, where, as we mentioned, has a very high density, but also on our east-west corridors. We're finding it's very difficult for traffic to get to some of these higher density areas, and so they are utilizing these east-west corridors such as 12th Avenue and 19th Avenue, where we're seeing traffic volumes as high as 35,000 cars or greater. And just by comparison, this is larger than any of our existing urban arterials today, so even more than a 45th Street or 13th Avenue. It is important to understand that when we look at these 100% growth scenarios, we aren't saying that this is going to happen in the short term. It's likely that this will be longer than 50 years into the future that this could occur. So in total, we're seeing our full build add about 57,000 new people and 90,000 new jobs. And so a really major increase to the overall growth in our area. So translating this into traffic, lanes, capacity, and traffic control, you can start to see those traffic volumes translate into 6-lane corridors on 12th Avenue and 19th Avenue. But as we look at north-south, we've got a lot more options for arterials. And so we've got 5 or 6 different routes to go north-south, and so we're able to maintain this traffic with less capacity, with the exception of that 38th Street interchange on the very southwest corner of our sub-area. And so these major corridors typically would require a traffic signal to be effective and safe. But as we look at some of the lower volume intersections, we are able to implement roundabouts, which allow for better operations on these types of corridors, but also allow for safer conditions as well by eliminating those angled crash types. Next, we wanted to translate this into a cost. And so if we're talking about 58,000 people in this sub-area, this is about the same population as the city of Grand Forks. And so imagine what it would cost to build up all the infrastructure for the city of Grand Forks. Now, of course, this is much denser based on our plans, so it'll be smaller footprint, but it's not just roadways. We've got water, we've got utilities, wastewater, storm sewer, everything that needs to be implemented to accommodate this area. And so in total, it ends up being more than $375 million to build out this entire area. Again, I want to reiterate the fact that this is our 100% build. And it's likely over the next 5, 10, 15, and even 20 years, we're going to see a fraction of this investment in this area. However, to fully accommodate this area to its potential would require a major investment. We also want to be clear that this is not just for vehicles. We want to make sure that we have a complete street-inspired multimodal plan. So that means that we want to accommodate pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit as a way to move throughout this area, particularly with the great density that's anticipated. And so you'll see on the right, kind of the middle of the screen, we have 4 different cross-section types based on the type of roadway and its adjacent land use. Each of these accommodations has different pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. So for example, our commercial arterial is utilizing shared use paths, which are just large paths along the road, similar to what we typically see around the metro area. Think Veterans Boulevard, 45th Street, 13th Avenue. As we transition to our collector roadways, however, we start to see on-roadway bike facilities accommodated as a base scenario to really facilitate this type of movement on more comfortable and safer roadways for bicyclists to be on that road. We also want to make sure that we incorporate other planning efforts such as the diversion recreational plan, so that we can make some connections to the great facilities expected along the diversion. But there's also future opportunities along railroads and rivers to provide more recreational connections as well. The last key scenario is our scenario analysis. And the scenario analysis is really based on the fact that we want to make sure that we look at all the various concepts, traffic pattern adjustments, and different connections that may influence how traffic moves throughout the area. And so a great example is the first picture on the top left. This was a concept that looked at a new connection along 32nd Avenue as an east-west arterial. I'm not going to talk about that concept today. I'm going to talk about 3 concepts that were recommended. This was ultimately not recommended. We looked at several dozen different ideas. Some just didn't really fit within the goals and vision of what we wanted to accomplish with this project, and some just didn't work. And so I want to talk about the 3 that did work. But the questions we asked ourselves was, as we went to this brainstorming workshop, was, will there be new major connections? Will traffic trends and generation change? What areas would benefit from more detailed analysis? So we'll give one example from each. The first example that I want to talk about is the Southwest Gateway. Now, as I've mentioned time and again within this presentation already, is that the southwest portion of the sub area is going to be our most densely populated and employed and trafficked area. However, this is also our biggest challenge area as it relates to transportation connectivity. So you can see on the aerial graphic, top middle of the screen, as we connect to and from the south, we have Interstate 94, several industrial land uses, the BNSF Railroad, and the Cheyenne Diversion. So making a connection would require several different bridges and impacts to be able to move traffic to and from the north and south. So this just really does create a challenge where we're either funneling all our traffic to the west past the sub area to 38th Street, the interchange you see on the graphic there, or you basically have to come up I-29 and go over on 12th Avenue or 19th Avenue, which is the 2 scenarios we're seeing. It's really creating an overburdened traffic system on these connections to get to this area. So we wanted to look at a concept that would allow us to provide better connectivity. And so this concept, maybe it's better visualized with the graphic here, is we would reconfigure the interchange with Main Avenue and I-94 to allow some north-south connectivity on 26th Street. We would then cross over the railroad tracks, and then we'd also cross over the diversion as a way to make this connection. And so we modeled this in the traffic model, and you can see that again with our color scale, dark red means we're grabbing a lot of new traffic, and then the dark blue means we're pulling a lot of traffic off. So we looked at both this interchange with and without kind of an overpass at 14th Street. And what we found is that this infrastructure improvement was incredibly beneficial to the overall sub-area, but really the metro in general. It allowed us to pull a lot of traffic off of our 38th Street interchange to the west, but then also a lot of traffic off of 19th Avenue to the north, so much that we could reduce the overall capacity of these corridors and really provide major benefits in terms of how long people were stuck in their car and how many miles they had to drive. And so when we quantified those benefits overall, it equated to over $800,000 every day to the public, just in terms of making it more convenient and easier to access this sub area. And that is a really, it's hard to comprehend exactly how beneficial that is, but we're talking, 45,000 vehicles utilizing this roadway at a much more efficient rate. So coming back to the graphic, it does require major investment, however. We're talking about several new bridges and reconfigured infrastructure, as well as some impacts as well. However, based on the overall benefits, we think at this time it does make sense to start to plan and reserve right away for a concept like this. The next scenario we looked at is modal split, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying how do you get to and from work? Are you walking, biking, taking transit, working from home, or driving your car? Now, historically throughout the metro, the majority of people have always driven to and from work on a personal vehicle. And so previous traffic forecasting exclusively looked at that mode of travel. However, when we compare our metro-wide versus our downtown Fargo trends, what we see are some major discrepancies. So in downtown, 18.6% of people walked, 3.9% people biked, and 3.8% people took transit. Now, throughout the metro, it's 3.4% walked, 0.5% biked, and 0.7% used transit. So you can see we're talking about massive changes. And so if we're going to talk about the sub area having really transformative densities, we can really start to expect a lot more people using alternative modes of travel. Also, with COVID-19 changing the way that people work from home, we might start to expect to see a reduction in traffic during those peak periods where congestion is heaviest. So we modeled this under the scenario where we said, let's say we reduce 13% of the amount of traffic we reduce, and that's just what we have metro-wide here today. And so we increased that by 50%, sorry, metro-wide is 9%, increased it by 50%. So in this area, we reduced traffic by 13%. And what we found is that by doing this through all of our land use areas, we were able to reduce 8 miles of overall capacity. And we have about, probably just over 8 miles metro-wide in terms of 6-lane corridors. And so you can really see, if you would imagine all of those to reduce to 4 lanes, but maintain the same level of efficiency, how transformative that really could be for the community, and how that will help propel further walking and biking and comfort of moving along these corridors. So that has major governmental expense benefits, major commuter cost saving benefits. So if you are still driving, you have less cars and congestion, you're going to see a major benefit. And then also health and equity benefits as well. We're just making these options a lot more desirable. And so this just helps reinforce the current livability initiatives that both the City of Fargo and West Fargo are currently pushing as part of their recent comprehensive planning efforts. And so this just provides some data to support that vision really does have some major benefits. Now the final topic is County Road 20. And so we elected to look a little bit deeper at this corridor for a variety of reasons. First of all, we've got a lot of short-term growth expected here. And then also, as we looked into the future, we realized we were on the cusp of a variety of different capacity and traffic control needs. And so we dove a little bit deeper along this corridor and really focusing in on capacity and traffic control, because at this level of planning, we're just not capable of doing a better job of analyzing the design concepts. What we found first and foremost is that right around that 2045 scenario is when we should expect that we need to add capacity, going from a 2-lane roadway to a 4-lane roadway. And so really no time in the short term are we expected that we need to add additional lanes. We do, however, need to add better traffic control to make sure that these intersections, these key intersections at the interstate, 45th Street, County Road 81, all operate much better. And what we found is that in kind of that mid to long, that 2045, 50% build scenarios, that a roundabout operates much better in terms of traffic efficiency and provides much better safety results as well. And so as we look short, mid, long term here, we really see that short and mid term really fitting best with roundabouts and 2 lanes of traffic. Now, as we start to widen, it becomes a little grayer what's better, a roundabout or traffic signals when we go to a 4-lane section and 100% build. However, we have a lot of time between that 25 to 50 year scenario to be able to resolve that matter. However, our initial analysis does show that roundabouts do provide a little bit better efficiency. The one thing we couldn't properly do, as I mentioned earlier, is dive into all of the design details. And so this is an example of 45th Street, directly adjacent to Drain 40. Now, as we look at roundabouts or new intersections with turn lanes, we're going to have a lot of design challenges to get this to work. Similarly, we're going to add traffic control at the interchange of I-94 and County Road 81 to the east. We have grades and a lot of different bridge, the railroad bridge crossing. There's going to be a lot of design challenges, and so these things need to be refined as we continue to move these projects forward. So finally, in conclusion, we had a variety of different next steps. First, we want to continue to monitor and manage growth. We can't achieve the goals and objectives that we have identified in this study if, for example, the first development comes in and it's a low density generator on the northwest part of the area that needs utilities. It kind of goes against all of the goals and objectives in terms of systematic growth and density and building so we can have great multimodal splits. So as we monitor and manage growth, we can do this through the process of approving land use plats and different development approvals to make sure that we do achieve that vision. Next, we want to preserve critical infrastructure. So we're not going to go and invest $375 million worth of infrastructure today. We need to do this systematically as demand requires it. But to make sure that we don't build ourselves out of some of these major improvements, we need to start looking at right-of-way preservation and refine major concepts that are vital to the overall success of the sub-area. We also want to continue to refine these concepts. As we need to allocate funds for these improvements, it's important that we understand the overall cost implications a little bit better. And so we can do this with further planning and more detailed analysis. We also want to maintain lines of communication. We have a very diverse group in this sub-area already: West Fargo, Fargo, Cass County, a variety of different neighborhoods and townships. And so we want to make sure that we work collaboratively to make sure that this plan makes sense and that it continues to make sense in the future and doesn't require additional updates. And finally, we want to identify some future studies. And I won't dive into this in any greater detail, but within the report, we identified several different items that key stakeholders had identified as being important, but they didn't just fit perfectly within our study. So we identified those as kind of future studies to look into a little bit deeper. So with that, I thank you for your time, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any further questions or comments. Thank you.